I'm Monty Dice with the Bridge Division Hydraulics Section, and what I was reading, 44 years with the department, that's more than I am years old. And Ben was involved in numerous stages through project development. Main focus now is the history of the department, so that's pretty exciting for us. Retired in 2014, that's the year I started. Let's give a warm welcome to Ben.
Thank you. Now we're going to learn about the Lost Bridge, and I think some people here drove across this bridge. I did. My first trip across it was in June 1975. And again, this picture was taken by Leo Harris, the cowboy photographer. You ever hear the term the Island Empire? And this is not a very clear map, but McKenzie County, and some people I've recently heard have still used this phrase, but McKenzie County was bordered by water. The Big Missouri River, the Little Missouri River, the Yellowstone River, and it was hard to get to. And the name, the Island Empire, kind of was given to it in the 1920s. And Clifford Johnson, who was a bridge engineer from the middle 1920s, who would have been involved with the Killdeer Bridge up until the 40s, in 1983, he wrote that McKenzie County was virtually an isolated island surrounded by the Yellowstone, the Missouri, and the Little Missouri River. So McKenzie County was an island. Highway Department needed to provide access to that, and we built 4 bridges: the Lewis and Clark Bridge at Williston, the Verendrye Bridge at Sanish, which is Newtown today, and the Roosevelt Bridge on Highway 85. Everybody's familiar with the Long X Bridge, I hope. The Roosevelt Bridge was the first bridge in that location. It was about a half mile, quarter mile to half mile upstream. And then we needed to build this bridge north of Killdeer. Are they the Badlands one word or Badlands 2 words? The one word Badlands are down in South Dakota, and they can keep it. Ours always were 2 words, Badlands. So whenever you're doing a project in the Badlands, make sure you write 2 separate words. Bridges, long time ago, 100 years ago, really started with local promotion. And promoting this bridge began in 1925. There was a group called the Town Criers, and they were in several other towns in North Dakota, and this one in Killdeer was a bridge promoting the bridge. And when I was involved with the Scenic Byway program in the Forebears Killdeer Mountain Byway, there still was a Town Criers group in Killdeer about 25 years ago. And there was a gentleman there, Dennis Moran. Kent Good talks about him in the hair document for this bridge. And I did a little more research on him. He was a Civil War veteran, comes to North Dakota, works on ranches, was a horse guy. He might have had his own horse corral, but he was involved with the Christensen ranches. He was also kind of a political type person. He would be promoting political ideas. So Dennis Moran is the one whose name that we're going to give to be the guy that really promoted this bridge in the early days. 100 years ago, all bridges needed to be funded by special appropriations by the state legislature. So it was in 1929 when the legislature approved those funds, The bill was introduced by Senator Keene from Dickinson, and there was an emergency clause so we could get going on that right away. And this picture is of the old Capitol, the Liberty Memorial Building, so you know where that's at. And the old Capitol would be just to the west and a little bit to the north of the Liberty Memorial Building, which is the State Library. They are not cowboys. They are not bandits. They are a North Dakota State Highway Department survey crew. And this is the crew that did the preliminary survey for the Lost Bridge and approach roads. The crew members, the crew chief was John Dillon, and other members of that crew were Fred Oberg, Percy Nelson, Red Nelson, Jim Kuykendall, Ben Haggard, and Clarence Haggard. Of the survey party, John Dillon, the crew chief, he worked for the department from 25 to 33. Then he goes to work for the USDA Forest Service on WPA CCC projects, which becomes a soil conservation service, and he worked for them in North Dakota until he retired in middle 1960s. Percy Nelson and Red Nelson spent their entire career with the State Highway Department, and at least one of them, I think, was in the Valley City District. Jim Kuykendall, he was a Killdeer cowboy. We had a Killdeer cowboy on our survey crew, and he took up ranching. Ben Haggard, he leaves and he becomes the very first livestock inspector with the North Dakota Stockmen's Association. And the last one, you're going to hear more about this guy, Clarence Haggard. He was a realtor and a political activist. And in 1971, Clarence Haggard had a petition going to stop the highway department from receiving our money from that legislature. He wanted to essentially take our money away at that time. The survey crew needed horses, and they got horses from Vic Christensen's Figure 4 Ranch, which I think was up northwest of Christensen's, had ranches up in the Turtle Mountain area. But the horses they were given were not saddle broke. Clarence Haggard gets on one of these horses. He's a cowboy. He knows how to ride horses. He tries to break one. He spends several hours riding this horse that day, the one he was going to use in the survey. He's all beat up, tired, sore. They give him the nickname Crip, or Cripple, and that's what they called him for the rest of the survey. He doesn't use that horse. He uses a cattle horse called Antelope, and that's the one he uses. So, but they got the horses from Vic Christensen. I don't know if they actually bought them or if they just rented them. But they had a saddle break their horses. The survey started in 1929 in May, and they went from north to south. So I think the Christensen Ranch was on the south side of the river. They had to cross the river. In 1978, there was a story in the Tribune about the Lost Bridge. And Clarence Haggard was the guy that they interviewed. So a lot of the stuff I got for today's presentation comes from that 1978 Bismarck Tribune article. All these survey pictures are from the John Dillon collection. And if you guys are out doing projects, it's great to take your camera with, take pictures, but make sure you identify the pictures. And just don't dump them on Poppy. Because I'm helping her, and going through these old pictures, and the reality is I probably would have to live to about 127 to get through all of those. So that's another half century plus 5 years from now, or 4, 50 plus 4. But in that early days, those guys, John Dillon was one, Ray Robinson was another, George Teskey was another, and Eric Jacobson was another. These guys had their cameras with them, and they provided us pictures. There's more chairs inside here, folks. Come on in. And these guys provided us pictures that are beyond value. Really, the reality is, we can't put a price on them, the importance these pictures are. So they started north, and the north approach to the Lost Bridge is actually pretty calm. There's some coulees to go through. So that went pretty smooth. Then they get to the river, and on the north side of the river there was a rancher that lived there. His name was Dan Beck. And he knew that when the surveyors got to the river, they were going to start boarding at his place. John Dillon, the crew chief, tells Clarence Haggard, asks him, "Can you swim, Clarence?" Clarence says, "No, I can't swim, but my horse can." So Dillon tells Haggard, "Okay, go across the river and tell Dan Beck that we're going to be over there. We're at the river now. We're going to start boarding at your place." Well, it was during the June rise, and the water is a little deeper than they thought. Haggard gets Antelope into the water. Pretty soon Antelope loses his footing. He can't swim. The saddle was starting to wiggle. Haggard and Dillon thought that Haggard was going to be a goner. But somehow Antelope finds his footing, gets out of the water, gets over to the Beck Ranch, and Dan Beck, the ranch owner, is helping Haggard, and he looks at the saddle and Antelope. It hasn't been cinched properly. So Beck gives him a quick lesson on how to cinch up the saddle. Antelope crosses the river back at high water, no problem at all. At the river, the survey at the river was the worst part of this whole survey project. On the south side, it was jungle. For lack of a better word, the lower left-hand picture is a picture of the approach on the south side. There was mud. They had to chop their way through there with the machete. And here's the 4 members of the crew. Left to right is Fred Oberg, Percy Nelson, Red Nelson, and Clarence Nelson. It's really tough to see, but Clarence Haggard has got a machete in his mouth between his teeth. And they use that for chopping their way through. This man up here in the water, he is naked. The mud was so bad, and sometimes they come in after their work, they go to the horse trough at the Beck Ranch and just jump in there with all their clothes and boots on to get the mud off of themselves. And sometimes they took all their clothes off if they had to get into the water. So south of the river, where it's really steep country and they had to finagle their way up there, they had a survey hang over the cliffs. And this was done before over on the Roosevelt Bridge and probably elsewhere in the Badlands area. But this middle photo, there's 4 men in this photo. There's one at the top, one halfway down, and this guy halfway down, he's got his legs spread out on the steep bank like this, looking down at somebody. In the middle here is a range pole somebody stuck in, and then there's 2 more men down below. So they're all tied on. Somewhere is up on top of that photo is where that rope is anchored. They all had faith in the anchor and the people who anchored it in. And if you're a surveyor and you ever had to do something like that, faith, if it's secular or religious, faith is important. So they did that. But they also had fun times. And they had fun with snakes. And this is at the Beck Ranch. The Killdeer mayor, Fred Tucker, was not from this country, like a lot of people was at that time. He didn't like snakes. Fred Tucker ran a Ford garage in Killdeer. And the survey crew knew that Fred Tucker did not like snakes. So what did they do? They captured one, put it in a box, tied it up in a box, take it up to Killdeer, put it in the shop for Mayor Fred Tucker to open up. I think he was a little bit aware of this goofy thing that was happening. He never got bit, but you know, the guys in survey crews, they had fun. I had fun. I was actually a crew chief for one summer in 1972 in Devil's Lake, and I had a good time. I had fun with my crew and stuff. You know, what do you get down in the river bottoms? What's the worst little pest you got going? What are those things? Mosquitoes. They were staying in the second floor of the Beck's Ranch house, and the mosquitoes in there, Clarence Haggard was saying, were so bad that they moved up to the top of the hills to start camping out. So their bedrooms came with a view. And in those days, you know, they were north of the river. They were camping out up there. They probably had all the provisions that they needed because there was no town to go to for them to spend the night in. So they were camping out, and this is Clarence Haggard here on the left in the bottom right picture, and Percy Nelson on the right. Both of them have cigarettes in their mouth. And the surveyors at that time, and I don't know when this practice ended, but all the surveyors, you can see Percy Nelson pulling up his boot, that, you know, almost knee-high boots that are lace-up boots. You know, they provided them protection and probably rattlesnake protection. So July 4th, 1929, you know, the survey is going to be done here pretty soon. They moved along pretty quick. So they're at the Beck Ranch, and they're having a celebration there. And standing left to right, that's those standing, John Dillon, Fred Oberg, Percy Nelson in the white shirt, Red Nelson in the tan jacket and the tan cap, Dan Beck, the rancher, and that's a real 10-gallon cowboy hat there, and his son, Bill, who's wearing the bib overalls and had a little cap on, cap of the day, those little caps, you probably would see him. And squatting with the jug is Clarence Haggard. In the 1978 Bismarck Tribune story, Clarence Haggard goes on to tell of the time when he left the highway department. He was on John Dillon's crew, and so this would have been prior to 1933 when Dillon leaves. And they're up there in Max, surveying Highway 83 from Max to Maya. And one of the duties of the survey crew, and I don't know if you guys do this now or not, but you'd be out in the daytime getting your field notes in, your elevations. In the evening, you had to put those down on paper. or on a roll of paper. And one day, one week, the crew was kind of lacking their after-work duties. It was a Saturday, and they worked 7 days a week. No, 6 days a week. They did take Sunday off. John Dillon said, I got to go back to Bismarck. So he leaves the crew up there and tells them, you got to work tomorrow on Sunday to get caught up in all your notes and all the stuff you need to do. Well, Sunday comes around, Clarence Haggard is in, John Dillon is in Bismarck. Clarence Hagan and the other boys on the crew, and I think of this crew, there might have been one of these guys on that crew. The crew says, well, to hell with Dillon. We're going to have fun today. They found, this was before Prohibition was over, they found somebody with some bootleg beer that probably had the alcohol content of whiskey. So they're getting drunk in Max. Here's the fire hall. People are in church, here's the fire hall. Well, there's a bell in the fire hall. We're going to ring that bell. They go in there, they start ringing that bell. People come rolling out of church wondering where's the fire? Well, our highway guys, they get in their car and they lit out for Minot. They don't want to be around town anymore. Haggard was talking about they get up to Minot, and here's a garden with cabbages growing. Cabbages, I don't know if you liked them or not, but he drives into the garden, runs over the cabbages in this person's garden, smashes the cabbages off. Then they thought, well, we better get back to Max. So they get back to Max, try to hide the car in a garage or something that they must have been renting. Well, they get caught. 30 days in jail. Haggard says, John Dillon could have gotten us out of that. Well, John Dillon was too good of a man. That you guys got to pay the price. And that was the last day Haggard worked for the state highway department. He gets fired. And you see these cars? They're down in the river bottom because the Beck Ranch was down in the river bottom. Before the bridge was built, you could drive to the bottom, to the river bottom. In January 31st, 1930, the Highway Commission ordered the Bridge Division to proceed with the design of the Killdeer Bridge. It was a 3-span Parker truss. It was riveted, 529 feet long, a 20-foot clear roadway, which was like the old Four Bears Bridge, and it had 15 feet of vertical clearance. There were no roads to the Killdeer Bridge. That's the story that we always hear why the bridge got lost. Myth or fact? Well, a little of both. Because there were trails, you could get to it, but they needed to get the construction materials down to the bridge site. You couldn't bring them by boat because there was not enough water in the Little Missouri River to float a barge up to the project site. So the highway department told Dunn County, if you want this bridge, you got to build a 4 miles access road, probably from the top of the breaks down to the bridge site. So Dunn County agreed, and then they built this little bridge in the summer of 1930. Dunn Center. Anybody know this little rivalry between Dunn Center and Killdeer? I first became aware of it when Dunn County was planning on building a brand new courthouse quite a while back, maybe 25 or 30 years ago. It should have been built in Killdeer, even though Dunn Center wanted the courthouse, and they couldn't get together, so the county commission said, we're just going to keep it in Manning and build our new courthouse there. The heck with the rest of it. Well, Killdeer's got this bridge. The survey's been done. The plans are under design. They're getting ready close to be bid, which is going to be coming up in Center. Dunn Center says, in September is when the project will be built. Dunn Center says, we want that bridge. So they started a petition. Well, that didn't go anyplace. We built the bridge where we planned to build. But always this rivalry between Dunn Center and Killdeer. So the plans were, the project was bid on September 27, 1930. And the contract, there were 4 contracts. The structural contract went to the Minneapolis Bridge Company, about $74,000. The grading, and there was a little earth grading done on the south approach, maybe just a touch on the north. That went to the Dickinson Construction Company. And at that time, in the early 1920s, we were bidding culverts and pipe separately. They were not part of our grading project which came not too many years later on. So the metal culverts went to the North Dakota Culvert Company, and the concrete pipe went to North Dakota Concrete Products. So the Bismarck Tribune on this day also talked about a group of people that went up to Killdeer to visit the project site. And in that article, they said, we're going up to look at the Big Rock Candy Mountain. So there was a hill or some kind of prominent point up there in the Killdeer Mountain area that was, the Tribune said, was recently given this name, the Big Rock Candy Mountain. And I couldn't find any other references to that. And if anybody up there today is even aware of that, but there was a point in the Killdeer Mountains that was called the Big Rock Candy Mountain. Construction begins in October 1930. And our bridge engineer was a gentleman by the name of Eric Jacobson. And his son, John Jacobson, lives in Bismarck, and I met him about a month ago. So that connection was really neat to find. And Eric Jacobson was born in Pierre, South Dakota, around the turn of last century. He went to college in Beloit, Wisconsin, and he comes back and he works for, I think, the South Dakota Highway Commission a bit. And he had his picture, his camera with him. And this picture on your right side of the screen is the Missouri River Bridge down in Pierre, South Dakota. So he must have been either in charge or involved with that bridge. And when it got complete, these hard-to-see pictures are all men. I don't think there's a lady that worked on that crew. It must have been the people that were involved in building that bridge. And they're sitting on the top of the truss, on this member coming across, standing down below. There must be at least 30 people in that picture. And if you ever see that picture, it's in the State Historical Society archives, and I think I did bring a copy over to the DOT. It's a great picture. But Jacobson then comes to North Dakota, and he worked on all those big bridges up in northwestern North Dakota. He worked on the Lewis and Clark Bridge, the Williston, the Rendry Bridge at Sanish, the Killdeer Bridge, and the Four Bears Bridge. He was a single man. He marries Rachel when the Killdeer Bridge is, no, excuse me, he marries Rachel when the Four Bears Bridge is under construction. and their honeymoon is on the project site. They had a little house there, and this picture here is Eric and Rachel's kitchen at Elbowoods. And the one on your left is Eric at the Four Bears Bridge. So Eric Jacobson worked for the department into the 40s. His son told me they went out to see Washington State for a while, and then they came back. And when he came back to Bismarck, I can't remember where. John told me where he worked, but it was not with the department. Eric Jacobson was a painter. And his son, John Jacobson, posted this on a Facebook page here in December 2021. And John said he believes this is where his dad lived during the construction of the Killdeer Bridge. And it's really kind of a neat little painting that he did. And it was done to sign Little Missouri River, ECJ, 1931. That's when the bridge was under construction. And there's a caption under here. And the caption reads, "Where the woodbine twinneth and the wang doodle mourn for its mate." And, I don't really understand that, but I'm guessing there was a guy living out here on this project site. Maybe he was dating Rachel at that time, probably. So he was maybe yearning for Rachel. Eric had his camera with him. Excavating for the piers were done by pick and shovel. They were down. And on the left picture here, there's this bucket. They shovel all the material into that bucket. And then it gets lifted up out of the hole and dumped. And I put on here, Skeet Kent Good wasn't aware of the survey and construction photos when he wrote the Hare document in 1992. And Jeannie and I visited about that and how Kent would like to have seen these pictures. And we miss him because he died here just recently, and it would have been great to have him here today for this story. These would have really aided him in writing that document. So this is an apparatus they used for getting that bucket out of the pier hole. It's a tower, an angle, there's cables coming across the top, and there's a cable coming down here, and there's a man here with a bucket, either dumping it or emptying it. So somehow that gets lifted up, moved over to the dump site and dumped. And they just left those there for the most part. Of course, we had concrete footings, concrete piers. You had to make concrete, and the construction camp was on the south bank, the south side. So here they're mixing concrete on the left picture, and the concrete is being poured out, coming down the chute, and in this truck is that same bucket that was used for excavating the dirt. That's what they used for transporting the concrete. Then they drive, sometimes they had to drive across the river to get to the pier on the other side. And then the concrete is lifted up by the same type of apparatus and dumped into the form. We're looking north on this photo. You can see there's water, so they're pumping water out of that cofferdam. Now we're looking south. You can see the construction camp on the right side of the photo. They had built some buildings. This project, construction began in October, just within a couple weeks after the bids contract was awarded. The contractor was all ready to go. So they were out there building this stuff. Over the winter, they worked on these piers and abutments. And then it was completed by August, by July. Here's some pictures of them building the deck and the truss. The two on the ends are of the Killdeer Bridge. The one in the middle, it's a riveting because this was a riveted truss. And this is one that Eric Jacobson took at the Elbowwoods Bridge. And I included it in here so you could just see early riveters from that time. And all of our, I think most all of our bridges had some riveting on them. So you can see the guy over here with a tool for catching the rivets that somebody's throwing to him. And here's a guy holding the riveter. And there's a guy down below here that might be putting pressure on or something up on top. So probably at least a 3-man operation right at the riveting. Well, the bridge crew needed to eat. What time are we supposed to be done? 10:10?
Yep.
I think we're okay. The bridge crew needed to eat. But here's the bridge. She's just about done. And you look at these little dark colored blips. That's the material that was excavated out of the piers. I don't know if they moved it out of there or if they just let the river move it downstream. But anyhow, that's the material. Annette Ellison, she was a lady from Norway, comes to North Dakota, into the Killdeer area, starts working on ranches, helping out the lady, the ranch wife. At one of the ranches she was on, the lady dies and there was this little girl on the ranch, and there's this girl in the front of the picture, Pauline. Well, the mother died, so Annetta, who's the lady sitting here, that's Annetta Ellison, she adopts Pauline. Tigan was her last name, T-Y-G-U-M. And then when Pauline is getting closer to school age, Annetta moves to Killdeer, and she starts a boarding house. And she moves to Killdeer because she wants Pauline to go to school. And this boarding house was big because she had a table that could seat 20 cowboys at a time. People would either stay there or people would just come in to eat at Annetta's. And during the construction of the bridge, a lot of the bridge building crew stayed at Annetta's boarding house, and she fed that crew. So you got to eat. And we look at her and we look at this lady, and her role in this project was as important as anybody. Because if you got somebody giving good food and chow to those workers, they're going to get their job done quicker. We had erosion problems when the bridge was being built. So we did a change order and built these jetties. On the left-hand side, you can see they're like a ball, a round globe with these pegs sticking out of them. Almost things like you might have seen on the beaches in Normandy, or anti-tank stuff, or that the military would have used. But at this time we were using these jetties, and there was kind of like a wire with vertical lines, vertical members strung between them, and that was put down into the river with the intent that it would catch sediment and then stabilize the river. So that was something that was done right away. You can see some false work for the bridge underneath the bridge there. Okay. The dedication was on July 5th, 1931. Some reports said there was up to 3,000 people that attended this dedication. Band from Dickinson, the North Dakota National Guard, they drilled and performed maneuvers. And there was also this sham battle, some pretend battle that was conducted. Our native people danced, and there was a rodeo, and the rodeo was put on by the guy who originated the Killdeer Mountain Rodeo, and Governor George Schaefer spoke. George Teskey took this picture in 1931, probably just before the dedication, or you can see some debris, construction material laying there, and we're looking to the south, southeast. Did the bridge have an official name? Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. We do know by searching through the Tribune that it was dedicated to the pioneers of western North Dakota. So there's some people that say that that was its name, the Pioneer Bridge. I'm not one of them in that camp. I won't argue with them. If they believe that, that's fine. But some things on my argument, what I found, there is no bridge plaque on this bridge. In all of our bridges that we built at that time had a bridge plaque, with the bridge name on there. The bridges were named by the State Highway Commission at that time. It was always referred to as the Killdeer Bridge. 2 years later, in our biennial report to the governor, the Highway Department still referred to it as the Killdeer Bridge. I believe it was just the Killdeer Bridge. Again, if those people that believe it's the Pioneer Bridge, it's an argument, unless we can find some papers that Governor Schaefer in his speech gave that day. We don't know for sure. If those papers are in the Capitol, in the archives, maybe we would know. Why weren't the roads built? Kent Good talked about this in the Hare document. Prior to 1930, all of our roads on federal lands were 100% federal. So we expected the road to the north of the Killdeer Bridge to be built with 100% federal funds. The federal government reduced that amount of money for those public lands highway funds, and the Highway Department didn't have enough federal funds and even the matching funds to build that road. So the roads never got built, and it was a funding issue. We did have a sign up there that said Little Missouri River. George Teskey took this picture in 1931. We're looking to the south, and the road that was built curves off to the right. I don't know where that road that Dunn County built was, but it looks like it went to the west of where that bridge was. Now we just go up the hill. Harrison Dam requires changes. Corps of Engineers, they built the roads in 1953. The paving north of the bridge was done in 1967, and paving south of the bridge was done in 1970. And you could drive to the bridge and cross over it, but it was mostly used by ranchers. Today's four-wheel drive pickups and all-wheel drive cars, you probably could have gotten there then. So the Tribune Road in 1953, access to the bridge was a mix of 2 track trails and section lines. So today there'd be, if we would have built that bridge today and not built the roads to it, there would have been all kinds of traffic over it. Them guys on their side by sides and stuff, they would think it would be the neatest places to go tear up the country. But the Corps of Engineers determined that the bridge needed to be raised and repaired. And that was already in the early 1950s when the dam was being built. They had calculated that. But it wasn't until 1959 when the Corps of Engineers finally let the contract for doing that. And Schultz and Lindsay was the contractor. It was $200,000 for raising the south span, portal repair, and raising the south approach. There was a 2-degree slope on the original bridge, and the south portal was raised. You'll see that in the next picture. And there's going to be a grade raise on the south approach. But here's the other bridge that was built at this site, the Detour Bridge. So there's actually been 3 bridges at that location right now. And here's the raised bridge. There are 6 portals on these 3 spans. 5 of them were damaged. And I think one of them had to be replaced. They were from the south north. So the north one was open. But she was beat up, old girl at that time, even though she was barely 35 years old. The new bridge, 1994, Dale Haglund. I would guess a lot of people in here know Dale Haglund. He was the engineer for the highway department on the bridge at that time. And he was quoted in the Tribune in 1994 that the old bridge is strong. It's a real good bridge, but it's too narrow. And that narrowness of our early bridges led to us having to remove bridges that probably could have stood longer. We've still got a few more minutes. This is a picture from 1984 by Buck Hill in the south unit of the park. It's our 3 kids, Judy's and mine, Aaron, Kelly, and Eric. I put them up there in that rock and took their picture. Bonus coverage. This is one of the early rodeos on the Killdeer Mountain. When it was up in the mountain. Every year there was a Killdeer Mountain Roundup where they'd round up cattle. Before that bridge and before that road was built, they had to have a cattle drive to get them up to the stockyards up at rail yards up at Killdeer. And this guy in the middle, this guy here, Hugh Stevenson, you look at him, and he's a real Killdeer cowboy. He looks just like the Marlboro man. Then they could start using trucks to haul cattle out of there. In 1955, there were 3 Beulah cowgirls that wanted to go to the Newtown Rodeo. And this picture is from Beulah, but it's not the 3 girls. So, from Beulah to Sanish, it took 3 days to ride there. They spent 2 days at the rodeo. This is the Sanish Rodeo in '53. And the Sanish Rodeo, and another 3 days to ride home. They had an 8-day vacation riding their horses going up to the rodeo. Any questions, comments, thoughts? Jeannie?
Ben, did you find any reference to when it was first referred to as the Lost Bridge?
No, I have not yet. And we could speculate today, and did it start in the Killdeer area? That might be a valid, or Watford City. It might have started up there, but we don't know for sure. But maybe by World War II, 10 years, maybe in 10 years, you know, we're just speculating. Or if not before, right at the beginning of World War II, probably it had to have been before the dam was built because it was called the Lost Bridge at that time. So most likely in the 1930s.
What were the age of the surveyors when they were surveying?
John Dillon was born around 1900, so he was about 28, 29. So all of those surveyors were and Haggard was born about that same time. So they probably were all in their late 20s. My first time, I had some pictures up here that I took in 1975 of my first time actually being down there. I was on a day trip with my fiance, Judy Petrick, who this was like in probably 72 in the springtime, or maybe shortly after we were married, maybe 73 after we got married. But Judy took over driving once we got through Highway 85 in the Badlands. Said, okay, we're going to go up north of Killdeer now, back to McCody. And she has to drive through that grade, through those curvy roads in the Badlands there by the Little Missouri River. And she was not an experienced driver. And that was quite a, I was enjoying the scenery and she was white knuckle trying to get down. Skip Sweeney, you know, she worked for us for a long time. Her dad had a ranch down there in River Bottom, north of Dunn Center. And they had to move when the dam got built. And they ended up in the Divide County area. And Skip said her family would come back and have picnics down in that down by the Lost Bridge with other people and stuff.
Any other questions?
I will be around today, this morning, and if you have any other questions that might pop up a week from now or something, you can always get a hold of me through Communications Division at the DLT.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.